opportunity to speak with you once again. And as Vicky has explained, we've been here for a few days now. And every trip we come to Tanzania, we find some things are the same and some things are different. And what I want to discuss today is the continuing circumstances that persons with albinism continue to find themselves in this country, and in specific today we're going to discuss the Lake Zone. But much of this is true for much of the country, and in fact true for much of Africa. But we'll focus for the moment on this particular area that we're gathered in. As you know, in 2007, 2008, 2009, and even in 2010, there was a great deal of focus in the media, both domestically and internationally, on the murder of persons with albinism. The actual killings of children and adults motivated by witchcraft. These made the headlines, both in Tanzanian media, Canadian media, American media, British media, European media, in fact all around the world. Over the years we've been interviewed. I've been interviewed by most major international media outlets. There have been several documentaries produced on this issue. And I'm sad to say that, unfortunately, Tanzania, in much of the international community, in recent years has become known as a place of killings of persons with albinism. And I know that there's much more to Tanzania than that. There's many beautiful things about this country and its people. But because of this incredible crime against humanity, the international media has felt necessary to continue to report on it. So the most extreme form of discrimination is murder. Discrimination and stigma and rejection exists on a scale or a continuum. Murder is the end of that. Over here is name-calling or isolation. And then there's everything in between. So for a moment, let's just pretend that the killings stop tomorrow, which they haven't. Killings continue to go on, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But even if the killings were to stop in Tanzania, we still have a huge problem. Because the killings at the hands of the murderers with the machetes may one day stop. We pray to God. But if those did one day stop, there's all kinds of other murders that go on. Slow killings through discrimination. For example, lack or denial of medical service, or lack of medical service to persons with albinism kills them by the age of 40 because of skin cancer. Lack of resources. Lack of employment kills them through poverty and starvation. So the kinds of killings that go on are a myriad. Some children with albinism are killed at birth. Babies that are killed upon birth by the parents or the midwife and secretly buried. This has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years in this country and in many other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. So infanticide, the killing of babies goes on. The killing through lack of medical attention. The killings through lack of employment and education, that people end up dying prematurely. So we need to understand that let's not just think of the atrocities against persons with albinism as these machete-wielding killers employed by witch doctors. That's one part of a much bigger story that's gotten all the attention. And we wanted to continue to explore what other forms of violation are going on against persons with albinism. And I'm sad to say that we have uncovered over the last several months in our investigation, as have other agencies uncovered, other international NGOs such as UNICEF, the Red Cross, even some internal organizations within Tanzania, government departments have uncovered abuse of a wide scale, gross abuse of children with albinism in schools in this country, in the Lake Zone. Abuse of a nature that is so horrific that if the people of Tanzania understood it, I would hope they would be disturbed. Although sadly, we've discovered that many people consider persons with albinism to be fourth-class citizens on such a low scale that for some people the abuse might not be disturbing. But today I'm going to assume the best, because there are many good people in Tanzania who would consider this disturbing. We've discovered that there are abuses going on. Physical abuse, physical violence perpetrated upon students in schools by teachers, by other staff members. Neglect, neglecting to provide food, clean water, proper sleeping conditions, proper living conditions. Neglect in providing any academic training, not accommodating the visual impairment of children with albinism, so they're unable completely to learn and become literate. So illiteracy rates are high among people with albinism, thereby cutting their life short. abuse of a sexual nature, where sexually boys and girls are abused by older children and by adults in some cases, raped. So between the physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, the plight of persons with albinism in this country is horrific. These have been reported to the authorities in some cases, and we await action. Just like the 63 murders of persons with albinism have been reported to authorities, and documented, in fact, 60 of those have been documented by authorities, and we only have 3 prosecutions. Now we've reported these cases of abuse, some that have gone on in government-sponsored schools for the disabled. And so we're concerned that the range of violations and crimes against persons with albinism is expanding in the country. During our time in Lake Zone, we've done a number of things. We have spent time visiting a school in Kagera, and we spent several hours visiting the school and finding out a school for the disabled, where there are a large number of children with albinism. And in this school, we found, as we have found in other schools for the disabled that are government operated throughout the Lake Zone, the living conditions are deplorable. The sanitation is inadequate. In fact, we saw a situation where the children with other disabilities, not albinism, who are unable to walk, are walking through the dirt on their bare hands and into latrines that are filthy. We find situations where there are 2 or 3 children in a bed, where the water is inadequate, the food is inadequate, the classrooms are overcrowded. One case where the area that was supposed to be given as a recreation area is now being used with a dining hall because they're overcrowded. So buildings are being used for multi-purposes. And so very little education ends up going on in these places because the staff are not qualified, they're not properly trained to deal with students with albinism. The teachers, in some cases, neglect or abuse the children. And so we are frankly overwhelmed when we go into these schools. There are some of the staff that have the best of intentions and really want to do a good job, want to help the kids, but they don't have adequate training. Or there's just not enough of them to go around for all the students that are there. So it seems clear to me that the priority for taking care of these children is very low. When we compare the conditions in other schools, other residential schools for children without disabilities, and you see the conditions in these schools, there's a marked difference. So it shows me that the priority system that's going on, and we're very disturbed by it. And so we spent time trying to encourage those kids. We distributed sunscreen lotions and sunglasses and tried to give them some words of education and encouragement, as we always do when we go to these schools. We know it's very little, but it's all we can offer at this time. What we can do is continue to lobby the government and other organizations to come to the aid of these kids, which we're doing. After going and spending the day in Bukoba,
Yes, Bukoba.
we also met some persons with albinism who had advanced cases of skin cancer, who were having difficulty accessing medical care. In fact, one young lady who is so overtaken with skin cancer that her life is very fragile. When these killings became rampant in 2008, her parents hid her away in the home. She was afraid to come outside. She was not attending school for 3 years. She was living indoors in a small house, not getting any sunlight. And the skin cancer the skin cancer she had from sun exposure began to overtake her. And there was maggots and bugs inside of her body. And it was so advanced because they're afraid to bring her outside because of fear of her being killed. This girl was basically hidden away. She is psychologically traumatized, physically has an advanced case of skin cancer. So this is the side effects of these killings. It's not just the killings, but now you have all of these ripple effects. It's like when you have an earthquake. The earthquake might have been the killings, but now the aftershocks keep coming. So now there are adults with albinism that have not been killed, that are still alive, but they're afraid to go to work, so they've abandoned their employment and their income-generating activities. They're staying in their homes because they're afraid to walk outside during the day. Students that aren't attending school any longer, so their development has been slowed down, their education has been stopped. People who have skin cancer because they're not getting treatment. And so we were exposed to that in that area. In Mwanza City, we conducted seminars. One seminar, we invited government officials and community leaders and the media to, where we screened our film white and black, crimes of color. And we had a large turnout at the NSSF Center. I think about 70 people attended the event. And this film deals with the discrimination of persons with albinism in Tanzania. And that film had a very strong response from all of those who attended. At that event, we met a young man with albinism. My colleague Don met a young man who had an advanced case of skin cancer and attempted to access medical resources for cancer on his lip, but told us that the discrimination is even there in the medical system. That when he goes, the nurses don't want to touch him, and the doctors aren't providing adequate treatment. And so he is at wit's end. The doctors give him, and the medical staff give him runaround, bureaucracy, fill out forms, go to this person, go to that person. The skin cancer continues to advance, and he's desperate, begging us for some lotion that would solve his problem, which of course we don't. He needs very serious medical treatment. And so this discrimination goes through every aspect of society, not just the machete-wielding killers, but nurses, doctors, teachers, parents, fellow citizens, government officials, police, even churches. So our concern is that this needs to be addressed as a society-wide issue. As I said earlier, even if all the killing stopped tomorrow, we'd still have a massive problem to work on. But that event was well attended. The people who saw the film were very enlightened, very educated. Under the Same Sun has a number of education and advocacy programs. This film is one of those major endeavors. It's being distributed across Tanzania and across Africa and around the world right now. We showed the film again the next day in Mwanza City to a group of spiritual leaders, bishops and pastors from a variety of denominations. Over 30 were in attendance. And those spiritual leaders were very educated, very shocked, very disturbed, very concerned about what's going on. And they have been conferring together, even today. I know some of you interviewed some of them, and they are trying to create a strategy in the Lake Zone to begin to address the discrimination that I just talked about. How can churches become part of the solution? What can they do? And to that end, we had an opportunity as well today to speak in a church in Mwanza, and we had to share with the congregation the plight of persons with albinism and explain the very things I just explained to you. And I shared the idea of Passover or Easter, which just happened, where on Good Friday, Christ was crucified, on Sunday he rose again. And we talked about the analogy of a comparison that persons with albinism are innocent of any crime, just like Christ was, and yet he was punished and crucified. And persons with albinism are being punished and discriminated against and killed only because of their skin color. Just think about this. If there's a part of the world that should understand this, I would think it would be Tanzania. On one of my previous trips, we went to a town. What was the community where the slave trade? Bagamoyo. We toured Bagamoyo on our last trip, and we saw chains that were used to chain slaves that were exported to Europe. And we saw the stories of slaves that were exported from East Africa and the horrible treatment they received because they were considered second or third class citizens. People of color, people with black skin were not considered as valuable as people with white skin. So they were being discriminated against and rejected and punished simply because of the color of their skin. Well, this same kind of crime of color, which is what our film is about, crimes of color, is going on here. Except it's reversed now. In a society of people with dark skin, people now of Tanzanian and African descent, simply because of the color of their skin, because it is white, are now being discriminated against. So crimes of discrimination occur in every society, regardless of skin color, regardless of nationality. Every society around the world deals with them. But our focus at Under the Same Sun is to deal with this discrimination